I'm Bill Hemmer. This is Hemmer Time. My guest today, John Adams. John, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Bill. Privileged to be here.
Yeah, thank you for your time. What I want our listeners to learn today is perhaps the history of Amy Coney Barrett and how she's touched on maybe some of the biggest rulings in the country and what viewers can expect from the hearings once they get underway. So that's what today is about. You are in Chicago, I'm assuming.
I am currently in Washington, D.C., but I do live in Chicago.
Gotcha. So you split time between Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin, correct?
That's correct. My law firm, Eimer Stahl, is headquartered in Chicago, but we also have an office in Wisconsin where I grew up.
All right. And you clerked with Amy Coney Barrett on the Seventh Circuit in the years 2017 and 2018.
I was privileged enough to clerk for her during her first year on the court. I joined 3 other co-clerks, and we comprised her first set of law clerks. It was quite an experience.
How's that work? Does she pick you or do you pick her? Or how is that?
Well, I think like any job, an aspiring clerk will apply to the judge that she or he would like to clerk for. And if the person's so lucky, the judge will bring that person on board. And in my case, I sent an application to Judge Barrett, and I was privileged enough for her to ask me to join her in her first set of clerks.
Now, just give me I'm a neophyte when it comes to this stuff. So my questions are basic, and I'm just trying to get an understanding. What does she see in someone like you that she says, come join my team?
Well, I think that would be a better question for her. But perhaps I could flip the script a little bit and tell you what I saw in her and why I decided to apply to her chambers and why I consider myself so privileged and fortunate to have clerked for her. Judge Barrett is brilliant. She's courageous and she's fair. And she's also someone who holds an unrivaled sense of humanity, humility, and humor, given her tremendous accomplishments and responsibilities. And that is someone who I wanted to hitch my wagon to and learn from.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to the big issues then, John. How well do you know her? How would you characterize that?
I know Judge Barrett pretty well. I spent a year with her working day in and day out on cases, and I was able to see the most admirable characteristics that I would consider in a person as she confronted difficult issues, as well as her professional competence to take on a very difficult job deciding complicated legal issues.
Roe versus Wade, 2017. I believe she is on record by saying it is settled precedent, although she disagreed with that. When this comes up at a hearing, and no doubt that it will, how will she answer that query?
Well, Bill, you are right. Judge Barrett has said that Roe v. Wade is settled precedent. And perhaps I can take a step back and I could describe first how she decides cases, something that I witnessed firsthand, and then we can get into any specific questions that you might have. But in the Court of Appeals, much like any other appellate court, including the Supreme Court, will receive briefs where the appellant or the petitioner or the plaintiff will ask the court to do something to resolve a case, a case or a controversy. And in our case, I witnessed Judge Barrett receive the briefing, the written briefing, and she would analyze every issue and every argument and give due weight to the arguments while considering the facts and the precedent and the record of the case before rendering any type of judgment. And she would also listen to the oral argument. She would ask incisive questions to each side before she would come to a conclusion. And that's the way that we can expect a Justice Barrett to rule on any case before her. She would approach each case with an open mind and a foundational commitment that either side might be right, and her decision would be what only the law requires.
Okay.
Now you bring up Roe v.
Continue.
Wade, and I will get into it. She has not decided any cases, any abortion cases, on the Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit where she currently sits. There have been some cases tangentially related to abortion, but she has never decided any cases. And one case in particular, a case called Price v. Chicago, Judge Barrett joined a decision that upheld a law that created buffer zones designed to protect abortion patients. And that is something that the First Amendment requires under freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And it's consistent with her application of the law, neutral application of the law without any type of personal consideration or public policy preference.
So if I am to interpret her comment on that, if you're saying it's settled precedent, then that would suggest that Roe v. Wade stands as national law. The critics would argue that she has tried to chip away at abortion laws on the state level. Is that charge true or not?
That charge is not true. Judge Barrett has not ruled on any abortion case as a federal judge. And in fact, and procedurally, I can describe two cases, and the procedure is important here. While she was not on the panel, so she was not one of the judges that decided the case, Judge Barrett dissented from rehearing the case with the full court. And Judge Barrett would have wanted to hear a case involving an abortion argument, and the full court did not, and she dissented, saying, I think the full court should hear that. The losing party then went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, vindicated Judge Barrett and said the full court should have heard it, and if the full court heard it this way, it would have had a different outcome.
On the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, in 2017, she weighed in, suggesting Chief Justice John Roberts push the act beyond its plausible meaning. How would she explain before the Senate committee how she might rule, given there's an Obamacare case that will be before the court about a week's time after the election, November 3rd?
Well, we'll have to wait to hear what she has to say, but I would emphasize her decision-making process that I described earlier, her approaching every case with an open mind and a commitment to giving each side equal weight and considering the merits, the facts, and the record of the case. But those comments that you made, I'd like to put them in context before going any further. Judge Barrett made those comments that you just described as a professor, as a law professor a few years back. And specifically, she made those comments in a book review article. Then Professor Barrett wrote about, in her book review article, what animated another professor, a Georgetown law professor named Randy Barnett, to write a book about the power of judicial review. And in that book article, she gave a descriptive account of what the dissenting justices in the case called NFIB v. Sebelius said about the Affordable Care Act. And so she was objectively and descriptively describing what the dissenting justices said. And it's important to note here, Bill, that the case in NFIB v. Sebelius, which she described descriptively in her article, presented a different question than the one that's before the court right now. The one that's before the court right now involves a different statute, a statute that was passed in 2017 called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which is central to the question in California v. Texas, which is the case that the Supreme Court will hear in the one that you referenced, and presents a wholly new issue for the court to consider. So it's not the same as what she had descriptively described earlier when describing NFIB v. Sebelius.
In that case, then, if she's on the bench and this case comes before her, it's an open question as to how she would rule. That's what I take from your answer.
That's right, Bill. It is an open question because she approaches each case with an open mind, and she would not prejudge or predetermine any outcome. And that would be consistent with your statement that it's an open issue.
Okay, and then
she would review the merits of the arguments, she would review the facts, and she would determine what the law requires and follow the law.
And there was this question as to whether or not Chief Justice Roberts classified it as a tax, and if you take away the tax, and then the whole law falls apart. So that's out there as well. There's also this question about her faith. She's deeply Roman Catholic, the mother of 7, 2 adopted children from Haiti. Youngest child, I believe, special needs to some capacity, is my understanding. Was a professor at Notre Dame and apparently was very well liked. But Senator Dianne Feinstein, during her hearing in 2017, has this famous quote where she stated, "The dogma lives loudly within you," referring to her religious dogma. What would lead Senator Feinstein to make a comment such as that?
Bill, I don't know. That would be a question for Senator Feinstein. But what I can tell you is that Judge Barrett takes her faith very seriously, like tens of millions or perhaps hundreds of millions of Americans. And what I have seen is that her faith has informed her and as a...
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.